الحمد لله وكفى والسلام على عباده الذين اصطفى أما بعد فأعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم قل هو الله أحد سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون والسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا محمد وبارك وسلم اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا محمد وبارك وسلم اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا محمد وبارك وسلم. We've been speaking over the last few weeks about returning to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and making a journey towards Him in our lives. And we spoke about many different angles of that over the past few weeks. And today I just wanted to share one different angle concerning this particular journey. So in life, we take many journeys. And for the most part, when we take those journeys, the details of that journey are contingent on the purpose of the journey. As for example, you take a trip to relax. Somebody goes on a vacation with their family. So that's a type of journey. And when a person goes on vacation with their family or goes out with their friends after final exams, or a bunch of people get together and they decide to make a road trip somewhere, one feature of that journey that makes it fun and makes it worthy of being pursued is the fact that you go with other people. In fact, for the most part, people prefer that their journeys be in groups, with company. So, for example, when family travels together, they like everyone to travel together. When people travel together, they like to travel with their friends. When people, go on a road trip, you don't just get in a car and go on a road trip by yourself and come back a week later. People will pack up their car with a bunch of friends, and then everybody goes on a road trip together. So one key feature of these types of journeys, and vast majority of journeys that we undertake in this life, is that those journeys are in groups. And because they're in groups, we tend to enjoy them more. Now, when the purpose of the journey changes, then you tend to travel in a different setup. So, for example, if you're going to your doctor's appointment, you don't say to a bunch of friends, "Hey, I'm going to the doctor's appointment. Let's all hang out, in my car." You get in the car and you go, and you have a purpose, and it's a very serious purpose, and so you tend to go by yourself. You might take one important person with you. When you travel for an interview, you don't get 6 of your friends together and travel for an interview. You prepare for the interview, you get on a plane usually by yourself, you're fairly focused, and you travel and you reach your destination. So, depending on the type of journey, you may travel alone, or you may travel with company, or you may travel with very specific people. In the case of a journey to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, so when a person is turning their life around and leaving the past life that they lived within and trying to approach their Lord and connect with their Lord, one important feature of that journey is that eventually you have to travel the path alone. Eventually you have to travel the path alone. And, in the initial part of this discussion, we talked about different types of journeys, and then I just associated the type of company based on the type of journey. So if it's a journey for pleasure, you tend to travel in a group. If it's a journey for work or for something more serious, you tend to travel with a very restricted group of people, perhaps even yourself when it's very, very serious. If you really want to get something done and you really have a focus, and you don't want anyone with you usually, because it'll distract you. So those are different journeys and different circumstances. Now we're talking about one journey, that journey to Allah. And what's important to recognize is that although that often begins in a group, eventually you have to travel by yourself. And this is something that unfortunately we don't appreciate in this day and age. Although that journey begins in a group, or can begin in a group, you cannot progress very far until you realize that you have to travel by yourself. So what do I mean by that? Well, the very initial phases of this journey, when a person is beginning to approach their Lord, it can occur in a group. You could travel with a bunch of your friends and go and sit in the talk. You can travel with a bunch of friends and go on Umrah. You can travel with a bunch of friends and go to the masjid. But that will only take you along the very, very initial portions of this journey. Eventually, you have to leave everything behind and you have to take the next step by yourself. There comes a point, there comes a threshold in that journey where you have to leave everything behind and you have to travel on your own. And what do I mean by that? I mean that there comes a point where you have to learn to see yourself and hear yourself and identify yourself and eventually develop yourself. Now, that threshold that's required, that crossing of that border that's required, that cannot happen with other people. Meaning you cannot do that in a group. You cannot do that with your friend. You cannot do that with anyone. Because invariably, when we're with others, it's harder to see ourselves. When we're talking to someone, we can't hear what our soul is saying to us. When we're with others and looking at other things, it's hard to be looking at oneself. What's required is that a person have solitary reflection upon themselves and progress towards their Lord. Now, how does that occur? Now, you'll see, interestingly, we're on this journey every day. Everybody in this room is on this journey every day. And the fact that sometimes you need a group and sometimes you need to be alone is completely embedded in the deen. For example, there's many congregational acts of worship. We have congregational prayer. We have, the whole ummah is fasting in the month of Ramadan. We have Hajj, and when we go for Hajj, it's a big congregation. So those individual journeys, those various, sub-journeys within those various stops within the journey, let's call them that, those are with groups, and there's benefits to that, and it encourages a person, and it causes a person to become excited, and it causes a person to develop confidence. When you see a whole bunch of people are fasting, it's much easier to fast. When you see that a whole bunch of people are praying, you feel like you belong to a group, and it's much easier to develop. However, at the same time, along with those congregational acts, there's also many, many acts within the deen, and in fact, the additional and supererogatory acts within the deen, those ones that take you to that next level, they tend to be where you are alone and isolated by yourself. For example, the Tahajjud prayer is not prayed in a group. The Tahajjud prayer is a very, very private prayer that occurs with an individual alone in the middle of the night, and that individual is sitting and reflecting and focusing on their Lord and trying to approach their Lord, and that does not occur in a group. That's not where a bunch of people get together and pray that. It's a very personal, private journey. But it's one of the most powerful journeys that a person can undertake. Waking up 2 in the morning, 3 in the morning, at the very, very last part of the night, when everyone else is asleep. I mean, what is so unique about that time? That's the time when everybody's asleep, when all the noise dissipates, when all of the companions on the journey are gone. The children are sleeping, the family is sleeping, most people are sleeping, everybody on the block is sleeping, and then somebody wakes up, and they wake up, and then they begin to reflect. Now, it's that period of time that provides a person with a very strong indication of who they are. That's when a person sits and thinks and says, how weak I am, how unable I am, how much I need to do, how many mistakes I've made. And that time can't be replaced with any other time in the day, because it's a very unique and very special time, but it's required. Similarly, there's a requirement. I should say it's a requirement. Similarly, there's a need for a person to have a period of time in which they can individually sit and recite the Quran and reflect on what it's saying. Now, you can do that as a study. Some people get together in a halaqah and then a person's explicating the Quran and everybody's sitting and listening. And I'm not saying that isn't beneficial. That's beneficial. It's extremely beneficial. But it also has its corollary, which is that an individual should also have a period of time in the day when they independently interact with the Quran and recite the Quran and are reflecting on the Quran and are developing an attachment with the Quran. All right. Now, we can sit together and we can talk about the mistakes that we've made. I could sit down and I could say, let's all together think about the mistakes that we made today. Did anybody misuse their tongue? Think about it. Did anybody misuse their eyes? Think about it. So that's possible. We could have that discussion. But it will never be as powerful as an individual sitting alone in a corner by themselves, thinking about how they spent their time and the mistakes that they've made and seeking forgiveness for those mistakes. You can't compare the two. Both are important, but you just can't compare the two. Each has its own place. Each allows an individual to travel a different portion of an essential journey. Now, you'll see that, in this balance, there's two extremes. A person can completely become congregational and not want to do anything by themselves, but always wanting to do something with another. Always wanting to go to the next gathering, always wanting to sit in the next meeting, always wanting to be around 12 other people. So there's a deficiency there. Similarly, a person cannot get completely isolated and say, I'm just going to sit in a corner and just do my dhikr all day and I'm not going to interact with the community. There's also a deficiency there. This journey has different phases, and each phase has its characteristics, and at that particular moment, those characteristics need to be achieved. So in the middle of the night, it's not the goal in the middle of the night that we call everybody together regularly and we get together and we all pray together. That's not what's done in our deen. The Prophet ﷺ established the sunnah for the middle of the night, and that sunnah in the middle of the night has its particular benefits. It has its particular details that allow a person to benefit from that time. And we're not going to be able to change that. In fact, if we try to change that, then we make a mistake. So we have to appreciate that this journey is very different than other journeys. Now, why do I mention this? Because people like to take journeys and they like to have their friends and they like to be comfortable and they like to keep other people around them and they like to keep noise around them. People like that there's always chatter in the background because that's what we're used to. People like that there's always people around them because that's what we're used to. But that depth of reflection that's required for a person to be able to travel upon certain phases of this journey cannot occur that way. They cannot occur that way. We have to sit alone in order to face ourselves. And if we don't face ourselves, we can never get past those barriers. It's easy to get a bunch of people around us and laugh and joke and forget about what reality is and forget about who we are and forget about our existence and forget about our deficiencies and forget about what we need to do to get to the next step. But it doesn't work that way. There's always a period of time that's required when we face ourselves, and that's a very hard thing to do. It's a very hard thing to do. Now, you see this in any field. You want to talk about what makes a good student. A good student is not the one that's always studying in a group. Sometimes a student, even if they like to study in a group, has to sit alone with the book and read it 20 times and figure out what's going on. Being a good student isn't just about going to class. Being a good student isn't just about being in a good study group. Being a good student also requires that at times you study alone. At times you reflect on the material. At times you spend the additional energy to make the effort, and that somebody just doesn't carry you along. We have these students that we work with constantly, and I don't go to the students and tell them the answer to every question. We give them the question, and then they'll ask for the answer, and we'll say, think about it a little more. Or let me give you a clue, and then we step away. And it's when we step away that they actually grow the most. It's when we step away that they actually grow the most. So these types of gatherings, like for example, we're all sitting here. I mean, the purpose of this gathering is not to make up for the whole week of a lack of effort. The purpose of this gathering is to just entice us to go one step further. But we can't go further without that effort. That's been the theme over the past several weeks. We can't go further without that individual effort. So when we sit down, when we say that when a person wants to turn towards Allah and they make that effort to approach their Lord, one of the beneficial things is that they spend time in the dhikr every day. That's a very important component of that journey. And it's done alone. I'll tell you one of the common emails that I get. Would it be okay if I sat together with my friends and we did our routine together? I always say no. Because that's not the routine. We'll sit together, go pray Isha. You'll sit together. Once a week there's the mahfil. You'll sit in the mahfil. But it also requires that there be a set effort on each of our parts to make an individual effort, an individual push towards our goal. And no one can change that, because that's the way the deen is. No one can change it, and that's part of the journey. And sometimes it's hard because everybody's used to doing everything with someone else. But it's something that we have to appreciate, and we have to put time in. And it's difficult because when a person gets into that phase, what ends up happening is that as they're in that phase, they then have to face themselves. When there's no noise around us, that's when we begin to hear our heart. When there's no noise around us, that's when we begin to hear the crying of our soul. When there's no people around us, that's when we begin to hear and smell and feel the effects of our sins. It's there, but we just cloud it. We cloud it with noise. We cloud it with text messages. We cloud it with constant communication on the internet. We cloud it with constantly being on the phone. We cloud it with constantly sitting around people and going out here and going out there and distracting us here and, applying our energy there. We can't hear what's going on. We can't see what's going on anymore. That isolation, that solitude, let's put it this way, that solitude is essential. And it means that the phone has to be away, the people have to be away, all of the surroundings have to be completely boxed off, and we sit and we close our eyes and we imagine that our heart's saying Allah, or we sit in a state of dhikr, and it's in that state that things are opened up to us. That's when our realities are revealed. That's when our weaknesses become most apparent. That's when we begin to make istighfar and begin to be thankful for the benefits and bounties that our Lord has bestowed upon us. But we need that peace. And what today's modern world, it's encroached upon every corner of peace that ever existed in any person's life. It's actually maddening. Wherever we go, it's constant noise. There was like a moment when you could have alone, and it just doesn't exist anymore. It used to be you could come into the masjid and there was really nothing to do. Now we can bring the whole world with us into the masjid and it's on a screen. So what's happening? Slowly, that little bit of space that we actually had, it completely disappears. It completely disappears. We're in the car, there's noise. We're outside of the car with our friends, there's noise. Any free moment is filled on the phone or on the internet or texting. There's noise. There's no more time to spend for an individual to be able to travel these components of our journey that are so essential to allowing us to develop. And we have to appreciate it. We have to make an effort towards it. We have to understand the paradigm, because it's by understanding the paradigm that we can succeed in our goal. So the gist of this is that the deen has components that are congregational and other components that require solitude. And those components that are congregational, they have their benefits and they have there's the hikmah that's embedded within them. But those issues that are related to solitude cannot be replaced with anything else. You can't replace it with text or phone or groups. It more than anything requires that everything be disconnected. So this is essential for us, and we have to appreciate it, because in this world everything is encroaching upon our space. And if we don't open up and create that space, then we're going to lose the ability to be able to benefit from these very, very important parts of this journey. So the summary is that all of us are on a journey. And like we've been speaking about over the past few weeks, that journey has its details. That journey has a paradigm which is pre-established upon which we travel. And one component of that, among the many, one component of that is that there are pieces of this, parts of this journey that are going to be congregational and parts of it which are going to require solitude. And they're fairly balanced. In fact, I would make the opposite argument. I would say that fewer aspects of the deen are congregational and much, much more is facing solitude. The Prophet ﷺ used to pray the farad prayer in the masjid and everything else was prayed at home. The farad prayer was prayed in the masjid. It's sunnah to pray the sunnah at home. Now in this day and age, the ulama recommend that people go ahead and pray the congregation, the sunnah prayers in congregation, because we leave the masjid, and once we leave the masjid, our our buffer of isolation is so limited that it cracks in a second, and as soon as we get home, it becomes difficult to pray. So seeing the context in which we exist, the ulama now recommend that just pray everything in the masjid, because the moment you get out of the masjid, that's going to crack. That shield is going to crack and it's going to be difficult. So that's the reason that we tend to pray the sunnahs in the masjid nowadays. But otherwise, if you want to look at the technicality of it, it's sunnah to pray the sunnah prayers at home. Sunnah to pray the sunnah of Fajr before you come to the masjid. It's sunnah to pray the sunnah of Dhuhr after leaving the masjid, after the farad prayer. So we can't replace those components. But most of the components of deen are actually those that require solitude. And that is a very important skill to develop, and it is actually an important skill in order for a person to be able to succeed on this path. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He create for us the opportunities that we are able to isolate ourselves in solitude. And we ask that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us among those who are able to quench and quell the noise around us, so that we are able to focus on and hear the calling of our heart. وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. صلوات